Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Couples Academy Show. My name is Hassani. Glad to have you all here with me this morning. We're continuing our conversation, our series, if you will, on sex addiction. That's right. We've been in it for the last few days because there's so much to cover. And we're going to continue that conversation here today. So, sex addiction, the addiction and recovery series. We want you to tune on in. But before we get started, make sure you take the time to like, share, and subscribe. Let your community know that we are here, so that we can have a really interesting conversation, because I'm sure that there are many people who are listening right now who know others who are going through this type of pain and don't know what to do to get the help that they need. All right. Last Chance Weekend coming up. Make sure you register for that. Also, the Phoenix Awards Gala, we're 11 days away. So get in there while you can. It's going to be spectacular. But let's dive into today's conversation. Today, we're talking about help for the betrayed partner of a sex addict. So it's important to understand that when infidelity happens in a marriage, the impact of it is very different when it's the result of a sex addiction. This is why it's so critically important that you work with someone who actually knows what they're doing and has experience working with those who have been struggling with the addiction of sex for quite some time. It lands differently. The path to recovery is different than if it's a different type of an affair. And so therefore, even though betrayed spouses have a similar hurt and pain, the pathway for healing for the betrayed spouse of a sex addict is different as well. And so we want to talk about that today. One of the things that I do find is that oftentimes there's obviously more of an acceptance. Well, that's the wrong word. I'm trying to think of the right word. Let me say it like this. When someone has an addiction, there's probably multiple offenses throughout the course of that marriage. And every one hurts just as much as the previous one. Like, they all hurt. But there's more of a willingness to work through that situation because the root of the affair is an addiction. It's this insatiable desire, this drive, this hunger that cannot be satisfied at the current moment with the person who struggles with the addiction, which leads them out of the home and causes them to engage in all types of behaviors. And so because the betrayed spouse understands what their spouse is dealing with, what we have found is that they're more willing to work with their spouse through that addiction to help them overcome that addiction. But it is a long road ahead. And if that person struggling with the addiction isn't getting the proper help, it will be a very difficult road. However, if they are, then the journey won't be as challenging. But while the focus has to be on the repair work needed to be done by the person who's struggling with the addiction, there has to be a focus on the betrayed spouse as well. And I think that a lot of betrayed spouses put so much time, energy, and effort on their partner, helping their partner overcome, they're not getting the help that they need. And so we want to talk about what that help looks like today, because there's a journey for them. So one of the things that I think is critically important to do, and I think a lot of couples do not do this, particularly for the betrayed spouse, is they have to, number one, focus on their own self-care. Because what we have found is that the betrayed spouse struggles physically, emotionally, just in every way. Now, let's deal with this. There's this thing called PIES, right? They need PIES self-care. Each letter in the word PIES is an acronym that stands for something. The P is for physical. The I is for intellectual. The E is for emotional. And the S, right? That's for the sexual. And so these aspects, or the spiritual, these aspects of your life have to be attended to and have to be maintained and have to be healed. Because if you're not operating as your best self, if you remain in a broken, fragmented state, if you become physically feeble, emotionally distressed, spiritually broken, then you can be no good to yourself. You can be no good to your children. You can be no good to your husband or your wife. You can be no good on your job. You are just not in a space where you can function in a healthy way. And so your personal self-care is critically important. You know, as it relates to the physical, a lot of times you have a betrayed spouse who just will not eat. and they're losing all types of weight. They're feeble, they're always exhausted, and so they just can't stomach anything. The moment they eat something, it all comes right back up. Or maybe they're intentionally starving themselves because now they have poor body image issues as a result of their spouse's addiction, and they feel as if they're not pretty enough, they're not sexy enough, they don't have the body that it would attract their spouse. So now they're going to go into starvation mode to lose a bunch of weight to gain the attraction back. And so it's coming from a very unhealthy space. And so as a result of it, it has health consequences on their physical bodies. And so it's important that if you are the betrayed spouse, you're taking the time to, number one, get the proper rest. What we've discovered is in this emotional roller coaster, it's very emotionally draining, and it has an impact on your physicality. You feel physically exhausted and tired. And so it's important that you get proper rest. There are a lot of betrayed spouses who struggle with the fact that they just can't sleep at night. Their mind is racing. Images, their imagination begins to run wild. They're playing out scenarios based upon fragmented information they've gotten from their spouse. Or they're having all types of nightmares and bad dreams, and they can't get good sleep. And so it has an impact on them. Imagine going through this for days and for weeks and for months. There's a lot of people who struggle with, what's the word I'm looking for? Where they can't sleep. They're just up all hours of the night. There's a term for it. It's slipping my mind. But if that's you have to figure out how to rest your body and how to rest your mind. Insomnia, that's what I was thinking of. And then on the eating piece, either you're not eating or you're eating emotionally now. So now you find yourself over consuming food, and you're eating emotionally to medicate yourself, to sedate yourself, to not feel. And so food has become the drug. Just like somebody can drink alcohol to sedate themselves or take drugs to get a high, you find emotional satisfaction because of a longing that you have within you within the food. And you're now adding pounds, right? And now you're starting to have, health conditions and all types of things because of your poor relationship with food. And so that's the physical piece. So that's something that you have to work on. But then there's the emotional piece. The emotional piece is a huge piece because that's where a lot of your self-doubt and your fear and your anxiety and your trepidation and your shame and your guilt and your resentment and your contempt and your disgust, all of these emotional feelings you're embodying on the inside of you. And when you sit in that and live in that, if that's the feeling that you hold on to and that you maintain, that now becomes a part of your temperament. Right? And if it becomes a part of your temperament for too long, it then begins to shape your personality. And so if that now becomes your personality and your disposition, now you carry yourself in a certain way, you talk in a certain way, and it literally begins to change how you look, how you walk, how you talk. It begins to consume you, because you haven't taken the time to release the negative toxicity, the negative emotions that you have within you. So there's got to be a filtering process where you release these negative emotions and get back to your emotional state. And there are techniques for that and rituals that you can engage in order to work on your emotional health, your emotional well-being, okay? Intellectually, this is critically important because your mind can get the best of you. And we know that the mind is the enemy's playground. And the enemy's trying to do everything to inject or to suggest negative thoughts in your mind. And so every thought of fear, every thought of doubt, the devil will suggest something, insert something. And because we're not mentally strong in this season of the recovery process, we allow these thoughts to come in and we don't reject them. We accept them. And we marinate in them and we ruminate in them. And the more we think about it, the more it intensifies. And what happens is I can tell that a person is thinking negatively if they feel negative, because the root of every feeling is a thought. And so you've got to guard this gate. You've got to guard this gate and be careful what you allow in your eye gate, in your ear gate, out your mouth gate, because the mind is really where every battle is won or lost. And so we've said this countless times that it was that it was Hitler who said that a lie told 1,000 times is more powerful than the truth told once. And so the question is, what are you telling yourself? What is the narrative that you're listening to? What is the story that you're telling yourself about the situation? What has gotten caught up in your intellect? And so what happens is, if I'm feeling bad and I'm thinking bad and I don't feel good about my relationship now, I begin to seek out information that supports the emotional feeling that I find myself in. And so now I look for hashtags and quotable statements, and I'm listening now to the wrong individuals who are feeding me poison instead of giving me the thing that I need to help me heal and restore my relationship. And so I built up this mindset and this belief system that doesn't support what I ultimately want. And so now I feel mentally and intellectually conflicted because my mind is saying this, but my heart is saying that, my body's feeling this way, and the spirit is saying that, and I'm kind of all over the place. So intellectually, I got to make sure that I feed myself, right, with healing information, with the Word of God, with things that remind me of who I am and what my destiny is and what the potential of my life and my relationship could be if I get in alignment. And then you have the spiritual side. This is the most important thing, because the fact is everything is spiritual. Even though we live in this natural plane and we live a very physical life, everything is spiritual. And we have found that those who have a spiritual center and core and have a true relationship with their Creator are those who can get through this pain a lot better than those who do not. Those who do not have a relationship with a Creator, with God, and they're just relying on their own intellect and their own emotions and their own physicality to get them through, they do not have what is necessary. You cannot rely upon yourself to get yourself out of your situation. There's got to be something bigger than you, better than you, grander than you, that you can submit to, that can guide you out of the pit that you find yourselves in. And so there's got to be rituals that you put in place for every single area of your life in this space. Remember, we talked about this thing called the quadrinity identity. Quad meaning four. So you have their physical self, your intellectual self, your spiritual self, and your emotional self. And oftentimes you're getting very different messaging from all four of these areas, but it's not until you come into alignment with yourself by engaging in morning rituals and evening rituals of self-care. When you begin to take care of yourself, because you are the lowest common denominator in your relationship, when that begins to happen, all of a sudden you can begin to see clearer now. Things begin to open up for you. You're getting guidance and direction. You're no longer in a stuck place. You're taking the necessary steps to move towards your personal healing. And if you are not healed and whole, you can't be anything for anyone else because you're still in a broken state. All right, we're talking about what the betrayed spouse needs to do, the help that the betrayed spouse of a sex addict needs to do to get to a better place. We're going to go to a quick commercial break and then go through the next steps. I hope this is helping. Stay tuned. Be right back.
Welcome to the Couples Academy app. The Couples Academy app is your go-to hub for how to do marriage right. Get started with our app today by perusing our amazing features that conveniently allow you to connect. This app is packed with powerful content and resources to help you grow and stay connected. With this app, you can watch our messages, find marriage resources, watch, listen, and read the real-life stories of restored couples, sign up for events, read articles and blog posts, stay up to date with push notifications, share your favorite messages via Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or email, and download messages for offline listening. For more information about the Couples Academy app, go to couplesacademy.org. Hey everybody, Hassani and Danielle here. I'm so excited. Look at us. Look at where we at. Look at where we at. We are at the Hilton Alpharetta, looking at this room before the incredible transformation that's about to take place on October 7th. Walls draped, stage up, lights, camera, action. And we want y'all to be there.
Are you going to be here?
Come on, get your tickets. It's October 7th. You don't want to miss this event. It is the
Phoenix Awards Gala. It is our first inaugural, and we're just getting started. But we starting hot.
Oh yeah, we got to.
We jumping out this gate like never before.
We believe either you go hard or you go home.
Go
and
hard
we're not
go
gonna be
home.
home. We're gonna
Go
be
hard
in
or
this
go
house
home.
where you need to be.
Come on,
so let's get it.
We want to see you on October 7th. Go to get your tickets at couplesacademy.com. We'll see you there.
Back. This is the Couples Academy show. We're talking about help for the betrayed spouse of a sex addict. The first thing we were talking about is pies, self-care, and a few comments came in about, stopping this cycle of negative thinking. And that is true. We think so many thoughts a day, but some of the dominating thoughts that we think are negative thoughts. And what happens is the more we begin to say it, the more we begin to hear it, the more we begin to hear it, the more we begin to believe it, the more we begin to believe it, it becomes cemented in our psyche. And if we feel a certain type of way and think a certain type of way, when there is evidence that supports the opposite of what we think and we feel, we reject it because it doesn't feel real to us. And see, this is the problem. That's why we say feelings are not facts, right? And this is why I say your perception is a perception of the reality. And so this is why we got to make sure that we have the right thoughts consuming our mind and not the wrong thoughts, because it can cause us to go down a rabbit hole. And once we go down that rabbit hole, sometimes it is hard to come out of it, because think about it. The more I think a thought, it creates a neural pathway in my brain. It's almost like it digs a tunnel through the highway of my brain, and it becomes a permanent structure and fixture. And then there's this pattern that loops back to the same thought and the same thought and the same thought. This is why the Bible says that faith cometh by hearing, and hearing the word of God. Fear comes by hearing, and hearing. You see, your belief comes by hearing, and hearing. The point is, a repetitive thought, a repetitive statement, a repetitive anything, if you hear it long enough, whether it's true or not true, you will accept it as truth. This is why you've got to guard this mind. This is why radio is called radio programming. Television is called television programming. Why do you think they play the same commercials day in and day out? Why do you think you hear the same music on the radio day in, day out? It is training or retraining your brain, right? It is brain washing you, getting you to think and feel and respond in a particular way. So if we know that these brains are impressionable, and if we know that we need to guard our gate, wouldn't it make sense to make sure that there are positive affirmations, faith confessions, the word of God, the right resources that we go to, and play those things again and again and again and again and again and again and again, so that it begins to shift the way that we think? I'd rather be faith-filled than fear-filled. And one thing about faith and fear, neither of them require any evidence, if you think about it. Faith is something you hold on to irregardless of evidence. Likewise, fear, same thing. So if neither have evidence, I might as well make the decision to be faith-based instead of fear-based, because fear brings me closer to the thing that I do not want. Faith brings me closer to the thing that I do want. Does that make sense? And when we can begin to do that, everything begins to change. All right, let's go to the next one. We talked about the pie self-care. Now we have to talk about the importance of creating boundaries. There's a phenomenal book series called Boundaries and Boundaries in Marriage, and how to, in essence, deal with safe people And so when there's been constant violations in the marriage, you have to establish boundaries that protect you from the bad behavior, from the consequence of that behavior. And many people misinterpret what a boundary is. When we establish a boundary, it keeps things from coming in, it keeps things from going out. But because boundaries are not done the correct way, it seems like it is more control that you are wielding on the offender, on the affair partner. The boundary that you create for you has nothing to do with your spouse. The boundary that you create for you has everything to do with yourself. So let me help you understand. Incorrect boundary. Now, I'm not saying that what I'm about to say should not be done. It should be done, but I'm giving you clarity on what a boundary is. If I say we need to establish a boundary in this marriage that there should be no more infidelity, okay? There should be no more connecting with any individual outside of the context of this marriage to support your mental, emotional, spiritual, or sexual needs, okay? So that is the boundary. That is the rule that we're establishing, okay? This can no longer be done. If it is done, I'm out. As an example, right? So some will interpret that and say, okay, so now you're controlling my behavior by telling me what I can't do. Now, yes, I don't want to cheat, but if I find myself cheating because I have an addiction, I feel like I'm being controlled by you. No. The boundary is, if you do X, Y, Z, this is what my response is going to be, because I can't control what you do. I can hope, I can pray, I can wish, I can want, but there's nothing that I can do to control or change you. The only thing I can do is control and change myself. So what I'm saying is, for my own self-care, so that I'm not continually put in a vulnerable situation where the possibility of an STD, the possibility of anything could happen, what I'm saying is that if this behavior happens again, to protect myself, this is going to be my reaction and my response. So the boundary is really self-management and control of me. See, that's different than an ultimatum. That's different than a threat. And so we're going to walk through the actual components of what a boundary is and how to create a boundary for yourself, and then how to create boundaries relationally that you both subscribe to, and creating these systems, if you will, this government, these laws, this relational code of ethics in your marriage will prevent and protect prayerfully future offenses from ever happening again. But if you don't have boundaries, if there is no rule in place that governs how you two live your life, then you're going to be signing up for more of the same. And none of you want to be in a marriage where you continue to experience more and more and more betrayals. So boundary creation really is a technique and a skill that you have to learn, because done the wrong way, it's almost like not having a boundary. They will continue to be broken. But when done the correct way, and trust me, we're going to do a series on this, when done the correct way, it puts a healthy, safe environment in place that's conducive for a loving, mutually beneficial relationship, okay? So the importance of boundaries is there. Now, the next thing I would say is get help. Get help. See, this is not something that you can necessarily do on your own. You've gone as far as your wisdom has allowed you to go. But at some point, you have to tap into the wisdom and the expertise and the guidance of someone else. And so for the betrayed spouse of the sex addict, there's a variety of different things that you can do. You can work directly one-on-one with someone who can help you deal with the hurt and pain that you're going through, right? Because you have to get back to your best self. But then there are support groups that you can join. You have to understand, there are all types of addiction programs for the person who struggles with the addiction, but they have support groups for the spouse of the addict as well. And being a part of a community where you are not alone, where others have gone through what you are going through, who you have camaraderie with, who you get support from, who you can establish a brotherhood or sisterhood with. is really helpful, because when you're going through this, a lot of times we feel isolated. We feel like we're the only ones that are going through it. We feel like no one else will understand. But there's something about being in a community of other people who get it, who know. Because the reality is, possibly as the betrayed spouse of an addict, I'm protecting my partner. I'm protecting their reputation. I'm covering and protecting their secret. I'm not telling my children. I'm not telling my parents. I'm not telling my siblings. I'm not telling my best friends. I'm not telling my coworkers. And so if I'm not telling anyone because I'm protecting my spouse, I'm protecting us, who do I have to talk to? Who can I pour out to? Who can I cry with? Who can I vent to? Oftentimes, the betrayed spouse doesn't have anything, doesn't have anyone. And so all the stuff that needs to come out of the betrayed spouse remains in and suppressed. And now you're carrying all of these negative thoughts and feelings and emotions, which now impact your own physical, spiritual, emotional health. That's why this got to be a filtering process where you release it, and a support system serves in that particular way. Now, let me just say this. If you are an addict, or if you are the spouse of an addict, be in these programs because they provide you support. But you've got to get to a point where you graduate from and beyond that support group. And I'm going to tell you why. If an addict is in a support group with other addicts for too long, and remember, we talk about the law of 33. 33% of the people in your life should be lower than you, so you help motivate them and pull them up to your level. 33% of the people in your life should be your positive reinforcing peers. But 33% of the people in your life should be 10x where you are, right? If all you're around are people who are struggling with the same addiction, the same behaviors, the same struggles, well, it keeps you stuck at a certain point. You sometimes need to graduate, once you've gotten what you need from it, graduate to another support group where you're constantly looking up, not looking laterally across or looking down. You have to be inspired by another life, by another level, by another reality of what's possible for you. Because if you turn in every direction and everybody's still struggling after several months and several years with the same thing that you are, psychologically embedded within your belief system, you will form the belief, oh, I guess this is just the way it's always going to be. I'm always going to have this struggle. I'm always going to be an addict. I'm always going to relapse. I'm always going to fall. And this is what it is. And then it becomes acceptable. And that becomes just the norm. Absolutely not. And so placing yourself in a different environment, okay, along your journey is critically important. You want to get around people who've overcome the addiction, not those who are still swimming in it. You want to get around people who have stories of success and victory and achievement, not those who are still falling and failing and struggling. You don't want those stories. So getting the proper help and being in the right environment is important, because you are a seed. And when a seed is planted in soil, whatever soil it's planted in, it's going to produce a harvest. And that seed is going to germinate and grow. You understand? And so when you place yourself in the right environment, the right stuff comes out of you. When you place yourself in an unhealthy environment, all of the unhealth comes out of you. So getting the right help from the right sources and the right community and the right therapists and practitioners, the right coaches, that is what you need to do. We all need help. We should not live on this earth by ourselves. We should not be on our own island. We should not internalize. We've got to release it. And so these critical steps, number one, self-care. Number two, creating the proper boundaries. And number three, getting the help that you need is the beginning of your journey. All right, guys, hope this was helpful and gave you some insight. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about what the addict, him or herself, needs to do and what help needs to be, embraced to get them to a better place. So have a conversation with your spouse. If you find yourself in an addiction, reach out to us at Couples Academy, 678-200-8996. Let us be a source of assistance for you to get you to a higher level of your life and your marriage. But until then, see you tomorrow for another episode. Take care.